The slap cracked across my face so hard my ears rang before the pain hit. For a second, all I could hear was fluorescent buzzing and the soft whine of the air conditioner in the Harper and Dunn conference room. The taste of stale coffee and copper flooded my mouth. My cheek burned, and the world narrowed to my father's hand still hanging in the air, his chest heaving like he'd just sprinted instead of hit his own daughter. I didn't reach for my face. I'd been knocked around by jet blast and ship ladders. I knew if I touched it, I'd look smaller than I felt. So I just blinked once, twice, and fixed my eyes on the Morgan & Sons logo embossed on the leather folder in front of me, the same logo my grandfather had worn on his cufflinks. You ungrateful girl, my father stammered, voice shaking with a kind of righteousness that made my stomach twist. You will sign that penthouse over to your brother, or you are out of this family. Do you understand me? His breath smelled like expensive whiskey and mint. The room smelled like toner and old carpet, and the lemon polish they'd tried to scrub grief out of the furniture with. Across the table, Eric lounged back in his chair, one ankle propped on a knee like this was a football draft instead of our grandfather's will reading. He didn't look shocked by the slap. He looked annoyed that it had delayed what he assumed was coming. Kara. My mother's voice fluttered somewhere between us, thin and useless. Just sign it. You don't even live here. You're always on some ship, or wherever you go. I turned my head slowly to look at her. The movement made my cheek throb. I could feel the swelling starting under the skin, hot and tight. She couldn't meet my eyes. Her fingers worried at the strap on her handbag, thumbnail digging into leather. The attorney, Mr. Callahan, cleared his throat. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the buzzing like a whistle. Every head twitched toward him. Mr. Morgan, he said, voice calm in that practiced lawyer way. You need to sit down now, or we will adjourn this reading, and I will be forced to note your conduct on the record. My father whipped around on him. Do you have any idea who you're talking to? Yes, Callahan said. I do. His gaze slid to me. For half a second, the polished professional mask cracked, and I saw something like apology flicker there. He raised an eyebrow. Are you okay? I straightened my uniform jacket, travel khakis, ribbons tidy over my heart, and made my voice as steady as I could. You should not have done that, I said to my father. The words came out low, controlled. My cheek screamed. And I'm not signing anything. The room went very still. You'd think after 12 years this uniform would mean something to him, that the bars on my collar, the tiny shimmer of surface warfare pin, the creases I'd pressed at 0400 would register as more than costume. But all I saw in his face was the same old rage he'd used on missed grounders and imperfect grades. You don't need $5.8 million, he spat. You're never here. You chose the Navy. You chose to leave. Your brother stayed. He deserves the penthouse. You were mentioned very specifically in your father's will. Callahan cut in gently. Sir, if you'll allow me to finish. My father rounded on him again. She doesn't understand. I've lived in this town my whole life. I built this family's name with my own. Mr. Morgan. For the first time since I'd walked in, Callahan's voice hardened. He let the silence hang. Long enough that even Eric uncrossed his arms and sat forward a little. Outside the tinted windows, a car alarm chirped twice, then fell silent. The air conditioner kicked on with a low hum that made the blinds tremble. Sir, Callahan said, do you know who actually owns that $14 million mansion you live in? The words landed like a dropped wrench. What? My father barked. I own that house. It's my home. I've lived there 40 years. Dad left it to me. Everyone knows that. Callahan folded his hands on the leather binder. His gold wedding band flashed once in the fluorescent light. With respect, he said, you might want to let me get to that part. A murmur rippled around the table. Great Aunt Susan sucked in a breath through her teeth. One of my cousins, Jason, looked suddenly very interested in the grain of the conference table. My father laughed, a harsh, brittle sound that always used to make my 13-year-old shoulders hunch. This is ridiculous, he said, color rising high on his neck. You're trying to stir things up. Kara, tell him. You know the house goes to me. That's how this works. I met his eyes. I know what Granddad told me, I said. He told me to show up, and I'm here. Something moved behind his gaze, not remorse, something closer to fear dressed in anger's clothes. Callahan closed the binder with a soft thump. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said to the room at large, "given recent developments, I'm going to suggest we pause here. The will is long. There are sections that concern only specific parties. I propose we dismiss everyone who is not immediate family, complete the formal reading, and then speak privately with Lieutenant Morgan regarding certain trust provisions." He emphasized the word lieutenant, just enough that my father flinched. "Trust provisions?" Eric echoed, frowning. His cufflinks caught the light, tiny gold baseball bats. Granddad had given those to him at 16. I remembered polishing them once before a banquet while Eric complained about how dorky they were. "Yes," Callahan said. "This portion concerns only Walter's direct descendants." There was an awkward shuffle of chairs and handbags. Relatives stood, some throwing me quick, uneasy glances as if I'd suddenly become radioactive. Great Aunt Susan squeezed my shoulder as she passed and whispered, "He was always proud of you, you know," before my father's glare burned her back into silence. When the door finally clicked shut behind the last cousin, the room seemed larger. Just 4 of us now, my father, jaw clenched, my mother, eyes shiny, Eric, bewildered and offended, and me, cheek already pulsing with a purple storm beneath the skin. Plus Callahan, a steady island at the head of the table. He opened the binder again, flipped to a red-tabbed section, and slid a document into the center of the table. "As executor," he said, "I am obligated to inform you that Mr. Walter Morgan executed a living trust 13 years ago regarding the Brookside Lane property, commonly referred to as the mansion, and additional assets. Per his instructions, that trust remained private until his passing, or until such time as it became necessary to protect the property." My father let out another rough laugh. "This is some legal trick." "Thomas," my mother said quietly, hand touching his sleeve. "Just listen." Her voice surprised me. It didn't sound like the usual, "let's not make a scene" softness. It sounded tired. Callahan adjusted his glasses and read, "The Walter A. Morgan Living Trust names as sole trustee and beneficiary Lieutenant Kara Morgan." My stomach dropped. "With specific language excluding any challenge from Thomas Morgan or his legal successors under penalty of immediate forfeiture of any bequests under this or related instruments." The air in the room thinned. "I don't—" My father's voice cracked. He cleared his throat, tried again. "You're saying what exactly, that he cut me out of my own house?" "No," Callahan said. "The will is clear. You and Mrs. Morgan are to receive certain liquid assets and personal property. However, the Brookside Lane residence itself and several related holdings have been held in trust in your daughter's name since she was 22. Mr. Morgan wanted to ensure the house would be in the hands of someone he believed would protect it from imprudent borrowing." His eyes flicked meaningfully toward the stack of unopened mail my father had shoved into his leather briefcase earlier. Final notice, urgent, past due. I'd seen the red stamps when he'd opened it to snap at my mother about some bill before the reading started. I hadn't said anything then. It wasn't my crisis. Apparently, Walter thought otherwise. Eric's chair scraped as he jerked forward. "You're kidding," he said. "You're telling me some technicality makes this house hers? She doesn't even live here. She's always on a ship or in another country. I'm the one—" "The trust," Callahan said, not raising his voice, "is not a technicality." He slid a photocopy of Walter's looping signature toward me. My name sat above it in neat type, and in Walter's handwriting at the margin, a note. "For her. She will know what to do." My throat tightened. I could almost smell his aftershave, hear the creak of his leather chair, feel the rough warmth of his hand on my shoulder as he'd said, "You keep showing up, kiddo. That's all the proof I need." "How long have you known?" I asked, my voice smaller than I liked. Callahan shook his head. "I knew the trust existed. Per your grandfather's instructions, I was not to tell you until his passing, or until someone attempted to coerce you regarding the estate. The slap," he added, eyes cutting to my father, "meets that threshold." "You can't do this," my father snarled at me. That house is my life. I built this family in those walls. You're really going to stand there in that costume and claim you own it? The old shame rose, automatic. The urge to apologize, to shrink, to say I'd sign whatever made him stop looking at me like that. But the trust copy was cool under my fingertips. The uniform on my shoulders felt like armor instead of costume. And Walter's note, that small scrawl, anchored me harder than any threat ever had. I'm not claiming anything, I said. Granddad did. I looked at Callahan. What else? I asked. Did he leave that they don't know about? My father's face went slack. Mr. Callahan closed the binder again, this time with a quiet finality that made the hairs on my arms rise. Lieutenant Morgan, he said, I think it's time we talked about the rest of your inheritance. My father opened his mouth to roar. For the first time in my life, I felt no urge to flinch. Because for the first time, I wasn't standing between him and what he wanted. I was standing between him and what was mine. I didn't cry in the parking lot. I sat in my rental car with the engine off, fingers pressed lightly to the side of my face, feeling the heat and the sting and the tacky line where his ring had caught skin. Late afternoon light bounced off the Harper and Dunn windows, and through the glass I could still see the conference room blinds quiver as people moved around inside, pretending they hadn't just watched a grown man hit his daughter in uniform. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. Mom. He didn't mean it. Come back in. We can talk. I locked the screen. Instead of starting the car, I let my forehead rest against the steering wheel and let memory do what it always did when I was too still. Rewind. I grew up in that mansion like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. The walls were high, the ceilings higher, and everything in between whispered my father's story. His football photos lined the hallway. Tom Morgan, hometown hero, college almost star, the man who could have gone pro if life hadn't gotten in the way. In every shot, Eric was on his shoulders, grinning. I was in two of them, half hidden at the edge of a team picture, and the time I'd snuck onto a bench in the background before Dad yelled at me to get down and stop drawing attention. When I showed up for sophomore year in my JROTC uniform, Dad stared at the brass like it was dirt. You look ridiculous, he said. Play acting soldier? You want to impress people? Learn the family business. Eric's taking over the real legacy. Eric had laughed with him. He always did. It was easier. Granddad had been the only one who looked at me differently that day. He'd leaned on his cane in the foyer, eyes soft, and when Dad stomped off, he tugged me closer. You stand straighter in that than your father ever did on a field, he murmured. If it matters to you, it matters to me. Understood? I'd nodded, throat tight. Later that night, when I'd sat on the back steps picking at the hem of my jacket, he'd pressed a small envelope into my hand. For your first flight to New Orleans, he'd said. Navy recruiter, isn't it? I'd stared. How did you think you're the only one who ever wanted out of this zip code? His smile tilted. Go see what you're made of. This house will still be here. Back then, I thought that promise meant something different than it did. The summer I shipped out to OCS, Dad hadn't come to the airport. He'd had a meeting. Eric had slept in. Mom hugged me in the driveway, mascara already smudged, promising they were proud but worried, like my life was a phase that was personally inconveniencing them. Granddad drove. On the way to the airport, he told me stories he'd never told my father, about scraping together the first down payment on the Brookside house, about refinancing to buy a warehouse, about the first time the hardware store had turned a profit big enough for him to take Grandma to dinner on something that wasn't a coupon. Money shows you who people are, he said, his hands steady on the wheel. Sometimes it shows you who you are too. Don't let it buy your soul or your silence. At the drop-off curb, he pulled a blue folder from behind his seat. It wasn't the trust, at least not the one I knew now, but it was the first time he'd handed me anything that looked like responsibility. Copies of my will as it currently stands, he said. You're not in charge of anything yet. I just want you to see how things work, how it all fits together. One day, you'll be very good at this. Why me? I'd asked, swallowing around the lump in my throat. Eric's the heir. He looked at me the way he always did when I said something he didn't like. Not angry, just disappointed I couldn't see what he saw. Because you show up, he said. Because when things get hard, you don't disappear. That's all it is. I'd carried that folder onto the plane like it was contraband. On nights in the barracks when everyone else was sleeping, I'd flip through it under a clip-on light, learning how assets moved, what intestate meant, the difference between a will and a trust. I didn't know it then, but he was already teaching me the language of the fight I was standing in now. By my third deployment, the mansion had started to sag around its edges. On my one Christmas at home in 6 years, I noticed hairline cracks along the foyer ceiling, wallpaper peeling in the dining room, a faint sourness to the air that smelled like mildew and unpaid bills. Dad shrugged when I pointed at a stack of red-stamped envelopes on the hall table. Everybody carries a little debt, he said. Your grandfather's sitting on millions and still lets this place rot. I've got to leverage what I can. Eric's business will hit big any day now. We'll be flush. Eric had given me a one-armed hug that smelled like beer and cologne. You worry too much, he'd said. You always have. It's all numbers on paper. Numbers on paper had bought my first car. Numbers on paper had become my VA loan, my condo, my TSP contributions. Numbers on paper could also crack a house in half. Granddad watched, quiet. That night, in the library, he'd set a mug of tea next to my elbow and said, I see your eyes, you know. You're counting the cracks. I'm trying not to, I said. You don't have to fix it, he replied. You can't fix a man who's in love with his own reflection. You can only decide how much of your life you're willing to hand him as a mirror. Granddad? He'd raised a hand. I'm not asking you to save your father. I am asking you to live yours. I didn't understand then that he'd already started building a world where I could. Shaz. The first deployment where everything felt off, I was in the wardroom on the carrier, half listening to a podcast about retirement while staring at my bank app. It wasn't anything big, just little anomalies. Property tax alerts that pinged twice in the same month. A random Zillow notification attached to the Brookside address. Is this your home? Claim now. A letter from a credit union I didn't use addressed to current occupant of the mansion. I forwarded them to Mom. Everything okay with the house? I typed. Do you need anything? She replied, we're fine. Your father has it handled. Focus on your mission. Love you. Granddad's reply, a week later to a different email, had been shorter. Keep your paperwork tight, kiddo. People get creative when they think you're too busy to notice. When he started getting sick, I'd tried to fly home but missed him by a week. The Navy had gotten me as close as it could. Deployment, flights, delays. By the time I made it to his bedside, he'd been cooling under white sheets, his hand already waxy when I laced my fingers through his, and whispered all the things I hadn't said enough. You're not late, the hospice nurse had told me gently. You've been with him all along. I hadn't believed her. Now, sitting in my rental car with my cheek throbbing and Callahan's words echoing, living trust, your name, 13 years. I realized my grandfather had been with me all along, too. In the way I read my LES, in the way I checked deed records just in case, in the way I felt that slap and didn't apologize for existing. My phone buzzed again. This time it was an unknown number. Lieutenant Morgan? A man's voice said when I answered. This is Mr. Callahan. I saw you pull out. I'd prefer not to discuss details in front of your father. Could you come back up? There's more you need to see, and some choices you're going to have to make. I glanced at the building, then at my reflection in the rearview mirror. One side of my face normal, the other red and swelling, uniform still crisp. My whole childhood had been about not making waves, not causing trouble, not upsetting him. Walter had built an entire legal structure, so I wouldn't have to keep living that way. I'll be right up, I said. As I stepped out of the car, the winter air bit my stinging cheek, sharp and clean. For the first time in my life, I walked back into a room my father had stormed out of, not to patch things over, not to smooth feelings, but to hear exactly how much of the ground under his feet had never belonged to him at all. When I went back up, the conference room smelled like old coffee and lemon cleaner instead of perfume and outrage. The chairs were empty. The water pitcher was half full. Only Mr. Callahan remained, sleeves rolled up, glasses low on his nose as he sorted papers into neat stacks like he had all the time in the world. He looked up and flinched when he saw my face. "I'm fine," I said before he could get the words out. The throbbing had settled into a steady burn. "Bruises scare people more than they scare me." His jaw ticked once. Then the lawyer came back. "Lieutenant Morgan," he said, gesturing to the chair closest to him. "Sit. We've got some things to go over, and I need to phrase a few of them very carefully." I sat. The leather sighed under me. He closed the will binder gently, then pulled a different folder from his briefcase. Dark blue, thicker, no name on the tab. "This is the piece your father doesn't know about," he said. "Walter asked me never to mention it until after he was gone, unless certain conditions were met. Those conditions are now satisfied." He slid the folder toward me, fingers lingering on the edge as if weighing whether to let go. "You're familiar with the concept of a living trust?" he asked. "Basic," I said. "We covered it at pre-deployment financial briefs, and Grandpa walked me through his old will years ago, but..." I tapped the closed binder with 2 fingers. "That didn't mention anything beyond the penthouse and smaller assets." "That's because this predates that will," Callahan replied. "By 13 years. The number landed like a dull weight in my chest. 13? I repeated. He nodded, flipping the folder open. The first page was a title. Morgan Family Residence Trust. Walter James Morgan and Kara Elizabeth Morgan, trustees. Underneath, in smaller print, was a date. I counted the years without meaning to. I'd just finished my first cruise. I'd been 21, green as the uniform still hung in my closet. Eric had been finishing college on Grandpa's dime. Dad had been talking about upgrading the kitchen. This instrument transferred legal title of the mansion to the trust, Callahan said. Retained beneficial use for Walter during his life. Named you as co-trustee with full successor authority at his death. Your father was notified only to the extent required and chose not to read the documents beyond the first paragraph. I stared at my name. I've been co-trustee since I was 21. My voice sounded flat, like it belonged to someone else. Yes, he said. Walter insisted. He called it training wheels. A breath left me in something close to a laugh, but there was no humor in it. Training wheels, I repeated. I thought of that airport drop-off, the way he'd handed me the blue folder and said I'd be good at this one day. Did he ever intend to tell me? Callahan's expression softened around the edges. Many times, he said. Every time you came home that he'd start to bring it up and then watch you juggle your leave, your visits, your calls, your attempts to bridge the gap with your parents and say, she has enough on her plate. She'll know when she needs to know. My hand brushed the printed letters of my name. They felt like raised ink, even though I knew they weren't. What exactly does the trust own? I asked. He flipped to the next page where a schedule of assets sat in tidy columns. My eyes went straight to the address that had defined my childhood. Primary asset, he said. The Morgan residence, what your father refers to as his mansion. Transferred into the trust free and clear 13 years ago. No encumbrances at the time. Encumbrances, I echoed. Loans, lines of credit. Precisely. He pulled another thin stack of papers from the side. What your father has done since then is complicated. The bank assumed he was a joint owner based on long-standing occupancy. They extended credit secured against his perceived interest. Unfortunately for him, and fortunately for you, he doesn't have one, which makes those instruments sloppy, possibly void, and certainly not your problem. I let that sink in. The house I'd always seen as Dad's castle hadn't belonged to him for over a decade. Every time he'd swaggered in the doorway, tossed his keys on the hall table, bragged about his property, he'd been standing on ground someone else had already moved out from under him. Does he know any of this? I asked. I suspect he remembers signing something years back and filing it under old man paranoia, Callahan said dryly. He never took the time to understand it. He assumed Walter would die first and leave everything the way it should be. Walter had other ideas. He turned another page. The columns shifted. Duplex on Maple, 3 single-family rentals, a storage facility off the highway. Then a separate tab of investment accounts, numbers that didn't feel real. Your grandfather was not quite as liquid as the neighborhood rumors suggested, Callahan said. But he was far from poor. These properties sit in a separate family trust, again with you as successor trustee. Your brother is listed as a contingent beneficiary on 2 of the rentals, only if certain conditions are met. Stable employment, no felony charges, documented sobriety. I almost choked. He'd hate that wording, I said. Walter chose every syllable, Callahan replied. He told me I won't bankroll a man who won't get off the couch, but I won't shut the door if he gets his head on straight. Kara will know how to walk that line. Heat prickled behind my eyes. I blinked hard, staring at the neat black letters of my grandfather's signature looping across the bottom of every page. My father's signature appeared nowhere, Eric's either. You need to understand 2 things, Callahan continued. First, legally, you do not inherit your father's debt. He has leveraged his reputation and assumed standing to dig himself into an $800,000 hole. That is his to fall into, not yours to fill. 800? I started. He held up a hand. We'll go over the exact numbers once we pull all the statements, he said. Second, as trustee, you now have a duty. Not to your father's ego, not to Eric's expectations, to the assets, to your grandfather's intent. That duty includes protecting the mansion from further encumbrances, even if that means telling your father things he does not want to hear. The word duty settled differently than inheritance had. It felt heavier, familiar. I know what a duty is, I said quietly. I figured you might, he replied. He slid a smaller envelope across the table. My name had been written on it in a hand I'd know anywhere, to Kara. I traced the letters with my thumb before opening it. Inside was 1 sheet of paper, folded twice. Kiddo, if Callahan is reading this to you, it means my body has finally done what bodies do. Don't waste time feeling guilty about not being there. You were there every time you picked up the phone, every time you wrote, every time you stood a watch that kept some other grandfather alive long enough to hold his granddaughter's hand. You've probably figured out by now that I moved the pieces years ago. I did it because I saw your father's eyes every time money came up, and I've lived long enough to know what that would do to this place if I left him the keys. This house was never meant to be a throne. It was meant to be a shelter. You know the difference. That's why it's in your name. You don't owe anyone your roof. You don't owe anyone your quiet. Use what I left you to build something worth standing in. If you choose to help your father and brother, do it with clear eyes and hard lines. If you choose not to, I won't be looking down disappointed. I'll be wherever old men go, raising a glass to the girl who finally stopped apologizing for taking up space. You'll know what to do. The words blurred. I pressed my palm flat over the page until the shaking in my hand eased. How enforceable is all of this? I asked. Callahan's answer was immediate. Very, he said. Walter was meticulous. The trusts are old enough to be beyond most challenges. Competency evaluations. Notarized statements. He anticipated every argument your father is likely to make and buried them in documentation. The more noise they make, the worse they'll look. Outside, a horn honked down on the street. I could almost hear Dad's voice layered over it, complaining about traffic, about fairness, about a world that never gave him enough. What happens if I walk into that mansion tonight and tell him? I asked. Lay it all out. House, debt. The fact that he's been borrowing against something that isn't his. Callahan considered me for a long moment. That depends on what you want, he said. If you want catharsis, you can shout it from the foyer and watch the fallout. If you want control, you take copies of these documents, you go home and you look at everything with your own eyes before you say a word. Walls, bills, loans, liens. Know the terrain before you walk onto the battlefield. The comparison slid into place like a round into a chamber. Recon before engagement, I said. He smiled faintly. I don't speak your language, Lieutenant. But yes. He gathered the papers, slipping certified copies into a slim briefcase he pushed toward me. Take this, he said. Lock it somewhere no one else can touch. I'll email you scans. Tomorrow we'll start contacting banks in the county. Tonight, you go home and see what he's done to your grandfather's house. I stood, the briefcase heavier than its size justified. At the door, he spoke again. I've worked with your family a long time, he said. Your grandfather was right about you. Don't let your father's opinion drown that out. In the elevator, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead. I watched my reflection in the mirrored doors. Navy travel uniform, hair pulled back tight, cheeks still hot, briefcase in hand. Overlooked daughter, golden sun, slap, trust, shelter, not throne. When I pulled into the long circular drive an hour later, the mansion rose out of the winter dusk like a ship taking on water, grand from a distance, rotting around the edges up close. The porch lights were on. A Christmas wreath hung crooked on the door, browning at the edges. Through the front window, I could see the shadow of my father pacing with a glass in his hand, phone pressed to his ear. I rested my palm on the steering wheel, feeling the old instinct to turn around, to avoid the fight, flare and fade. Instead, I reached for the briefcase, thumb brushing the edge of Walter's letter through the leather. Then I opened the car door, stepped out into the cold, and walked toward the house my father thought he owned, ready to see exactly what I'd been entrusted to protect. The key still fit, but the door didn't open cleanly. It stuck, like the wood had swelled with all the years nobody bothered to maintain it. I had to lean my shoulder into it, briefcase thumping against my leg, before it gave with a tired groan. The smell hit first, not the furniture polish and lemon my grandmother used to insist on, but stale beer, cold grease, and something sour underneath. Unpaid time, maybe. The foyer chandelier was on, but half the bulbs were dead, throwing long, tired shadows down the hall. The marble floor should have gleamed. Instead, scuffed tracks and dull patches showed the path my father paced night after night. I closed the door behind me and just stood there for a second, listening. TV murmuring somewhere deeper in the house. A dishwasher cycling with nothing inside. The faint wheeze of the furnace working harder than it should. I set the briefcase down on the entry table next to a stack of unopened mail with red stamps shouting final and delinquent. In a chorus my father had somehow managed not to hear. I picked up the top envelope, slid it open with my thumb. Property tax past due, third notice. I checked the date. 3 years back, plus every quarter since. My father always bragged about paying things early, about taking care of business. I moved into the office. Grandpa's old room of order had become a paper graveyard. The mahogany desk was buried under statements, loan documents, glossy catalogs for things nobody needed. I flicked on the banker's lamp and started sorting. Bank letters, credit cards, 2-second mortgages I didn't recognize, each secured by interest in an address that technically belonged to the trust in my briefcase. I laid those aside, jaw tightening. There were also small, desperate things. Pawn slips for watches, a jewelry receipt for a ring I'd never seen, a printout of an online casino deposit. Loss wrapped in thin layers of hope. In the corner, a cardboard box overflowed with envelopes addressed to Eric Morgan. Collections. Overdraft notices. A pre-approved line of credit he'd clearly already burned through. The golden sun's shine had been financed with interest. I moved methodically the way I did when I inventory checked a supply cage downrange. When you stopped making excuses for what was on the shelves and just wrote down what was there. By the time I finished the first pass, the desk had lines. Taxes, loans, credit cards, Eric, utilities. The loans column was taller than the rest. I pulled out my phone and photographed each stack, front page visible. Evidence, dates, amounts. Under one pile, I found a draft document with Eric's name already filled into the grantee line of a deed transfer for the mansion. It hadn't been notarized yet, but the intent screamed loud enough. My father's handwriting covered the margins. We deserve this. She doesn't even live here. Walter owed me. Owed, not loved, not trusted. Owed. My fingers tightened around the page until the paper crinkled. Bootsteps thudded overhead, familiar, heavy, impatient, and then the muffled slam of a bedroom door. A moment later, Eric's voice drifted down the hall, too loud from the kitchen. Dad, she's not picking up. Maybe she went back to base. Good, my father grunted. More time to get Callahan to fix this. Fix? Like this was a squeaky hinge, not a legal hurricane. I put the draft transfer down with exaggerated care. Then I walked back to the foyer and closed the office door. If I'd learned anything in the Navy, it was that once you understood a space, map, obstacles, lines of fire, you decided where you wanted the engagement to happen. I chose the dining room. The table still wore the scar from where my father had slammed his fist the night he told me only real Morgan men understood business. A white ring cut through the wood like a permanent bruise. I stood at the head of the table, Grandpa's old spot, and laid out three things. A copy of the trust deed for the mansion, with my name under trustee, the living trust schedule listing the house as an asset, and Walter's letter. They looked small against all that polished wood, small but solid. The TV cut off. Two sets of steps moved toward me, voices growing clearer. I'll call the bank first, my father was saying then. Then, Eric, you go back to Callahan and make him see. She's not going to keep that penthouse, Dad, Eric cut in. She's never even here. It's wasted. They turned the corner into the dining room and stopped. My father took in the papers on the table, then me at the head of it. What are you doing in here? He snapped. You don't just come into my house and start snooping. I met his eyes, letting the word my roll around in my head like a round I hadn't fired yet. This isn't your house, I said. His face reddened, the same blotchy red I'd seen when a contractor challenged him on a bid. Excuse me? I tapped the top document with one finger. This is a copy of the living trust deed Grandpa signed 13 years ago, I said. He transferred legal title of the house into the trust then, named himself beneficiary. Named me co-trustee. At his death, it rolled fully to me. The county has had it on record ever since. He laughed, a short, disbelieving bark. Don't be ridiculous. I've lived here 40 years. Your grandfather wouldn't. He did, I said softly. Because he watched what you did with money. And he wanted this place to outlast your pride. Eric stepped closer, peering at the paper. That's just some legal trickery, he said. Dad pays the mortgage, Dad pays the taxes, it's his house. I slid the property tax notices across the table toward them. No current mortgage, I said. Taxes 3 years behind. Loans and lines of credit taken against collateral you don't legally own. The bank extended them because they assumed you had standing. You didn't. My father snatched one up, eyes running over the numbers. The color drained from his face. You went through my office? He hissed. Walter's office, I corrected. You just stopped treating it like one when the paperwork got boring. He slammed the paper down. Fix this, he said. You're the one with Callahan in your pocket now. This Navy act of yours? Fine, you win. You get the penthouse. Happy? Just sign over your share here so we can keep the house in the family. He jabbed a finger at the blank signature line on the draft transfer. The way he said family sounded more like threat than comfort. No, I said. The word came out quiet but clean. It felt like a door closing behind me. His mouth twisted. After everything we did for you. You didn't pay for my college, when I said. Grandpa did. You didn't drive me to MEPS. He did. You didn't send packages on deployment. He did. You didn't pay for this roof, Dad. He did. And then he protected it from exactly this conversation. Eric threw up his hands. So you're just going to hog everything? He demanded. The penthouse, the house, the rentals, whatever Callahan told you, you're barely home. I've actually been here. I took care of him. I thought of the ledger entries, the dates on the loan applications, the charges at resorts on Eric's card while Grandpa was in and out of hospitals. Showing up for holidays to ask for money isn't care, I said. Mowing the lawn twice a month doesn't erase the overdrafts or the casino receipts. That's none of your business, he snapped. It became my business the second Grandpa put my name on his assets, I said. He made me responsible for protecting them. That includes protecting them from you. My father took a step toward me, hand flattening on the table. The light caught the raw skin across my cheek where his palm had landed earlier. His eyes flicked to it and away, fast. You ungrateful girl, he said. We raised you. We fed you. You think just because you ran off to the Navy and your grandfather favored you, you can walk in here and take everything from us? I remembered standing in that kitchen in high school, a Navy brochure in my hand, my father laughing like I'd told a joke. You? Please, you'd wash out in a week. I remembered Walter, in contrast, folding the same brochure and sliding it into his pocket, saying, if anybody can do it, she can. I'm not taking anything from you, I said. I'm refusing to let you take what isn't yours. Grandpa made his choice years ago. You just didn't bother to read it. Eric's voice dropped into something closer to a whine. I just need a start, he said. You've got the Navy. You've got benefits. I've got nothing. You have two hands, I said. You have a degree you never used. You have years of second chances. You're 32 and still asking your sister to give up her roof so you don't have to stand on your own feet. That's not nothing. That's a life you chose. Silence rolled over the table. My father's shoulders sagged just for a second. Long enough for me to see the man underneath the bluster, the boy who'd grown up in his father's shadow and never learned any identity that didn't include this house and someone smaller than him in it. Then his jaw hardened again. So what now? He demanded. You gonna throw us out? Call the sheriff on your own family? Is that who the Navy made you? The old guilt pricked under my ribs, automatic as breathing. But Walter's words were still warm in my pocket. You don't owe anyone your roof. You don't owe anyone your quiet. I'm going to talk to Callahan, I said. I'm going to make sure the bank stops pretending you own something you don't. Then I'm going to figure out what keeps this place standing without letting it swallow me with you. He stared at me like I'd spoken another language. And us? Eric asked, voice small now. What happens to us? For the first time, I said. That's not my job to figure out. A car passed outside, headlights sweeping across the windows, cutting through the dusty glass and the faces of the three of us around the table. For a heartbeat, I saw it the way Walter must have. A beautiful old structure holding too much history, being dragged down by people who refused to see they were termites, not caretakers. I gathered the papers into the briefcase, the click of the clasps sharp in the stillness. Don't touch anything on that desk, I said. Don't sign anything. Don't call Callahan. From now on, you don't talk to him about this house. You talk to me. My father opened his mouth, then closed it again, eyes darting toward the front hall where the coats hung. His shoulders seemed to shrink a fraction. What are you going to do? He asked. Exactly what Grandpa trusted me to do, I said. I picked up the briefcase, walked past them, and stepped out onto the porch into the cold air. The sky over the driveway had gone deep blue, a single star pricking through. I breathed in, slow and steady, letting the burn in my cheek remind me of the line I'd just drawn. Tomorrow would be banks and lawyers and hard numbers. Tonight, I drove to the cemetery, the trust papers heavy beside me on the seat, ready to tell Walter that I finally knew the whole of what he'd done, and that I was done pretending I didn't know who this house and this life were really meant for. The cemetery gates squeaked the same way they had the day we buried him. I parked under the bare maple at the edge of the gravel loop and sat for a second, hands still on the wheel, watching my breath fog the windshield. The briefcase sat upright in the passenger seat, buckled in like a second person. Okay, I muttered. Let's do this. The cold knifed through my uniform as soon as I stepped out. The VA-style section where Walter lay was neat and orderly. Granite heads all in formation, a geometry of service and endings. His stone was the same as always. Simple, name and rank and years. The little cross he'd insisted on. Someone from the Legion had stuck a small flag in the ground last week. Snow had crusted around the base. I set the briefcase down on the stone bench beside the plot and sat, letting the weight of it press against my thigh. Hey, I said quietly. It's me. Wind hissed through the trees. A crow complained somewhere deeper in the grounds. You really did it, didn't you? I went on. You moved the pieces before any of us knew there was a game. I opened the briefcase and pulled out the top page, the trust deed with the house address, his signature and mine. I know about this now, I said. About the rentals, the stocks, the letter. I took the note from my pocket, smoothing the creases. For her. She will know what to do. I don't know what to do, I admitted. Not yet, but I know what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to let your house get sucked into the same sinkhole as Dad's ego. I'm not going to sign anything to make life easier for the people who never showed up. Images flickered, his hand on my shoulder as I boarded the bus to boot camp, his voice saying he was proud like it was the most obvious thing in the world. You were right about how bad it was, I said. The loans, the taxes, his taxes. The way he looks at that place like it's proof he's worth something. It's worse than you knew, probably. But I'm here. The wind stung my eyes. I wasn't sure it was all from the cold. I'm going to talk to Callahan, I said. I'm going to keep the house in one piece, and I'll give them as much mercy as doesn't put that promise at risk. That's the line. I brushed my gloved fingers over his name once. Thanks for trusting me, I said. I'll try to be the person you thought I already was. By the time I drove back into town, the sky had gone from iron to full dark. The Harper and Dunn building glowed faintly on the corner, warm rectangles of light in the second floor windows. Callahan was still at his desk when I knocked on the glass of his open door. He looked up, glasses low on his nose, tie loosened. Lieutenant, he said, I was just going over some numbers. Come in. The conference room was already set up, his laptop open, a legal pad covered in his tight handwriting, a printed summary with columns and highlighted lines. He slid a copy toward me as I sat. I pulled everything the bank would give me without a subpoena, he said, plus tax records and lien filings. Do you want the short version or the long? Short, I said. We can do long after. He tapped the top of the page. Your father has approximately $820,000 in outstanding personal debt, he said. That's a mix of unsecured credit lines and loans, plus 2 home equity products taken against the mansion. He has also failed to pay property tax on the residence for 3 years running. My throat tightened, even though I'd known it would be bad. Am I on the hook for any of it? I asked. Callahan shook his head. No, he said firmly. The trust shield is solid. The house has been in the trust's name since Walter signed that deed. Any creditors who extended funds against it did so without verifying current ownership. That's their error. You did not sign, guarantee, or authorize any of these obligations. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. So what happens to him? I asked. That depends, Callahan said. If you want to press the issue, we can notify the bank and the county immediately. They can call notes due, file actions, start foreclosure on any collateral that isn't protected. Given his income, he would likely be forced into bankruptcy. He watched my face carefully. Or, he went on, you can do nothing, for now. The trust can pay the back taxes and stabilize the house. As long as he doesn't take on new debt in the property's name, you're insulated. His other creditors will continue to chase him personally. So I have the option to drop a financial nuke on him, I said. Or not. That's one way to put it, he said dryly. My fingers traced the edge of the paper. Part of me, the 17-year-old girl in the hallway while he laughed at my enlistment plans, wanted to push the red button, to let the banks and courts strip away the arrogance he'd wrapped himself in my whole life. But another part heard Walter's voice again, softer. You don't owe anyone your roof. You don't owe anyone revenge either. What would Walter want? I asked. Callahan's expression softened in a way I hadn't seen before. He wanted you protected, he said. That much is clear. He also knew his son. That's why he did all this quietly instead of disowning him with a letter. I think he wanted consequences, not annihilation. I nodded slowly. Okay, I said. So we pay the taxes from the trust. We notify the bank that any further attempts to secure loans against the trust property will be contested. We put a flag on the title so nothing can transfer dirty. And your father? Callahan asked. I'm going to give him a chance to be honest for once in his life, I said. If he takes it, maybe there's a future. If he doesn't, then at least I know I tried before I let the system do what it does. Callahan capped his pen, leaning back. That's a very Navy answer, he said. Measured use of force. I snorted. We call it rules of engagement. He smiled, just a flicker. I'll draft the notices, he said. You focus on that conversation. By the time I pulled into the mansion's drive again, only a few windows glowed. The place looked less like a castle and more like what it was, an old house clinging to an identity that no longer quite fit. The dining room lights were off, but there was a sliver of yellow spilling out from under the door of Walter's old library. I found my father there. He sat in the leather chair by the cold hearth, a glass of something untouched on the side table, shoulders hunched in a way I'd never seen. No TV, no sports commentary, just the tick of the mantel clock. He looked up when I stepped in. For once, he didn't start with a demand. Kara, he said, voice rough. You're back? I leaned against the door frame, leaving space between us. I went to see Callahan, I said. I know the numbers now. He flinched just a little. Of course you do, he muttered. Walter's favorite. Gets the whole story. Nothing ever mine, is it? According to the county records, I said quietly, this house hasn't been yours for over a decade. He let out a harsh sound that was half laugh, half sigh. He never told me, he said. Just sat there and watched while I thought. He trailed off, staring at the dark fireplace. You thought it made you bigger, I said. He swallowed. It was all I had, he said finally. The house, the feeling. Being the one in charge. Your grandfather. He was always the real man in the room. I thought when he went, it would finally be me. And then you. He gestured vaguely at my uniform. You went off and became something I didn't understand, something that didn't need me. I blinked. I was your daughter, I said. That's all I ever wanted to be. He winced like I'd slapped him. I didn't know how to father someone who didn't need saving, he said. So I just ignored you, focused on the mess that did need me, on Eric, on the bills, on anything that let me feel like the one holding things up. His gaze flicked to my cheek, lingering now. I shouldn't have hit you, he said abruptly. At the lawyers, He swallowed again. My father hit me every time I made him feel small. I swore I'd never. And then today, the clock ticked, each second heavy. I was wrong, he finished hoarsely. About that. About you. About a lot of things. Silence stretched between us, thin and fragile. I'm angry, I said finally. Not just about today, about years, about watching you pour everything into Eric and pretend I didn't need anything. I know, he said. And I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen, I added. You don't get a clean slate because you managed one apology. That's not how this works. He nodded once, eyes fixed on his hands. What happens now? He asked quietly. I stepped a little further into the room, but not all the way. Here's what's not going to happen, I said. You're not going to take out any new loans in this property's name. You're not going to sign anything related to the house without me. You're not going to fix this behind my back. He didn't argue. That alone felt like a tectonic shift. And as for you living here, I went on, we have two options. One, you pay rent, something manageable but real. Two, we sit down with Callahan and a financial counselor and build a plan you actually follow. No more secret cards, no more pretending. He stared at the empty hearth. You kicking me out? He asked. That depends on whether you can live here as a tenant and a father, I said, or if you can only live here as a king. His mouth twitched, almost a smile and almost a grimace. I don't know how to be anything else, he admitted. Maybe it's time to learn, I said. We sat in the quiet, each with our own ghosts. I went to see Walter today, I added. At the cemetery. His jaw worked. What did you tell him? He asked. That I know what he did, I said, and that I'll protect it, even from you. Maybe especially from you. He nodded slowly. He always said you were the strong one, he murmured. I thought he meant stubborn. A weak huff of a laugh. Turns out he meant something else. Strong doesn't mean letting people walk all over you, I said, even if those people are your parents. He looked at me then, really looked, like he was seeing not just the uniform, but the person wearing it. I'd like a chance to try again, he said, voice small in the big room. I know I don't deserve it, but... He spread his hands helplessly. I'm tired of being this man. I thought of all the nights Mom must have sat alone in this house while he nursed resentment and debts. Of every time I'd swallowed a retort to keep the peace. I'm not promising anything, I said. You start with rent and honesty. You keep your hands to yourself. You treat me like a daughter, not a rival. Maybe, over time, we can build something that isn't just obligation and history. He nodded, eyes bright. I can do that, he said. I can try. I believed the second part. The first, time would tell. I set Walter's letter down on the side table, folding it so the last line faced up. For her, she will know what to do. My father's fingers hovered over the paper, not quite touching. What are you going to do now? He asked. I took a breath, feeling the weight of the house, the trust, the choices ahead. Go back to base, I said. Finish out my leave here, cleaning up your mess and Grandpa's paperwork. Then, come fall, maybe host Thanksgiving. He blinked. Here? He asked. Yes, I said. In the house he loved. At a table where you don't get to decide who deserves to sit at the head. A ghost of a smile flickered again, wry and wondering. I'd like to be there, he said. That will depend, I said lightly, on how well you do at being a decent human from now until then. On the way out of the room, I paused at the doorway and looked back. He sat hunched, but not as collapsed as before, eyes on Walter's handwriting. For the first time in a very long time, he looked less like a wall I had to push against and more like a man who might, someday, learn to stand beside me instead. I turned off the hall light and climbed the stairs, the trust binder under my arm and a new, fragile possibility quietly settling where the old script used to live. By spring, the house sounded different. Less like a mausoleum trying to remember how to breathe, more like an actual home that hadn't decided yet what kind of family it would hold. I moved through my days like a split screen. Mornings in navy khakis on base, afternoons in old jeans at Walter's desk, sorting through piles of bills and statements, severing knots he'd warned me in his way, he'd tied up for me to untangle. The first big change was the calendar taped to the fridge. Rent due. I'd written in clear block letters on the first of each month, with a number beneath it that Callahan and I had agreed was fair, enough that Dad felt it and respected it, not so high that it crushed him. The first time he slid an envelope onto the kitchen table on the first, his hand shook. Here, he muttered. On time. I counted it, nodded, and handed him a receipt I'd printed from the ancient inkjet. Thank you, I said. Same next month. He stared at the word rent like it was a foreign language, then tucked the receipt carefully into his wallet. Eric sulked for exactly 10 days before his credit cards finally bounced and the auto drafts started failing. I found him in the driveway one afternoon, pacing beside his dented Mustang and cursing into his phone. They canceled my gym membership, he spat. And my card. They canceled my card, Kara. Cards get canceled when you don't pay them, I said, stepping past. He grabbed my arm, then thought better of it and let go. I'm your brother, he said. You have a penthouse and this place and a trust and all this stuff Grandpa gave you and what? I'm just supposed to, what? Work at a gas station? How about an auto shop? I suggested. You've always liked cars. He scoffed. I'm not. You are a grown man, I cut in. You can either get a job or get used to not having a gym membership. Those are the options. For once, there was no lifeline thrown from the doorway. Dad stood just inside the foyer, watching, jaw set. A week later, Eric came home in an oil-stained polo with a generic car care logo on it, smelling like tires and brake fluid. Day one? I asked, passing him in the hall. He shrugged, looking anywhere but at me. It's fine, he muttered. The guys are cool. Good, I said. Stick with it. He took one step, then stopped. Do you really think Grandpa meant for you to have all of it? He asked abruptly. The house, the penthouse, the stock, all of it, not me? I thought of the window envelopes on Walter's desk with Dad's name on them. The lonely holidays. The way my grandfather's eyes lit up at every letter I sent from some pier in some port. I think Grandpa meant for his legacy to end up with the person he trusted to protect it, I said. That's all. Eric swallowed, then nodded once to, Okay, he said. I get it. I didn't know if he really did, but it was the first time he'd acknowledged that maybe this wasn't a mix-up, that Walter hadn't just forgotten him. Mom changed in smaller ways. She still flinched when voices rose, still smoothed placemats and fussed over curtains. But she also started staying in the room when tension built instead of fleeing with a dish towel shield. One evening, as I loaded the dishwasher, she hovered in the doorway, twisting the hem of her cardigan. I should have said something, she blurted. I looked up. About what? About all of it, she said. The way your father talked to you, the way he pretended Eric was the only one who needed anything. I thought keeping the peace was my job, that if I didn't rock the boat, no one would drown. She laughed, sharp and self-mocking. Turns out, she said, we were already sinking. I closed the dishwasher and wiped my hands on a towel. You were surviving, I said gently. Sometimes that looks like silence. She nodded, eyes shining. Seeing him apologize to you? She shook her head. I didn't know he had that in him. Me either, I admitted. She stepped closer. I am proud of you, you know, she said. I should have said it sooner, but I watched you leave in that uniform, and part of me was afraid this house would feel even emptier, and I didn't know how to be happy for you and frightened for me at the same time. My throat tightened. Thank you, I said. It felt like opening a window in a room that had been closed for years. By the time leaves started turning at the edge of the lawn, the house felt different. The stacks of red stamped bills on Walter's old desk were gone, replaced by organized folders. Trust, taxes, repairs. We'd paid off the back property tax. The county notice on the fridge now read, current. Dad had started attending a financial counseling group at the community center. Sometimes he came home with pamphlets. Sometimes he sat at the dining table with a legal pad and a calculator, brow furrowed in unfamiliar humility. One night, I walked in to find him on the phone with a credit card company. Yes, ma'am, he was saying. I understand. No, I won't be taking out new accounts. Yes, I have a budget now. My daughter is helping. He glanced up, met my eyes, and didn't look away. Thank you, he said into the phone, then hung up. What? He asked as I raised an eyebrow. I just never thought I'd see the day you let a call center rep lecture you about budgeting, I said. He huffed a laugh. Me neither, he admitted. Turns out being broke and almost homeless is motivating. Winter crept in on quiet feet, frost edging the windows, the air smelling like chimney smoke and coming snow. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, I stood in the middle of the dining room and looked at the long table. When I closed my eyes, I could still see years of holidays where I'd hovered near the kitchen door, carrying dishes, laughing too loudly at jokes that stung, pretending the empty chair at the end of the table didn't feel like mine. I opened my eyes to the room as it was now, less polished, more worn, but ours. Okay, I said aloud. Let's try this. I texted Mom first. Kara, Thanksgiving, here, if you want to. Her reply came 30 seconds later. Mom, yes, thank you. What can I bring? Then Eric. Kara, I'm hosting Thanksgiving. I need someone to fix the wobbly chair before it kills Aunt Joan. You in? After a long pause. Eric, yeah, I can do that. I hesitated only a second before adding, Kara, you can bring a side dish too, something not from a box. His typing bubble blinked. Eric, rude. I'll try not to poison anyone. The night before, the house buzzed with a low, unfamiliar energy. Mom fussed over pies. I basted the turkey. Dad hovered in the doorway like a man afraid to touch anything. Do you need help? He asked. Yes, I said. Take these out to the car and don't eat anything off the trays. He folded napkins at the table, carefully this time, like he remembered everyone he'd knocked to the floor when I was a kid. On Thanksgiving Day, relatives filtered in with casseroles and hugs and cautious glances. Aunt Joan squeezed my shoulders. Look at you, she said, in charge of the house and the holiday. Your granddad would be bursting. I smiled. When everyone was seated, the noise dipped. All eyes shifted to Dad at the head of the table out of habit. He cleared his throat, then looked down the length of the table to where I sat. Kara, he said, you should do this. I blinked. You sure? I asked. He nodded, eyes steady. This is your house, he said. Your table, that's all. It was such a small sentence, it felt like an earthquake. I stood, hands resting lightly on the back of my chair. Thank you all for coming, I said. Grandpa wanted this place full, and I think he'd be happy to see it like this. I caught Dad's eye, then Mom's, then Eric's. This year's been a lot, I said. We've lost some things and found some others. We're not pretending we didn't screw up. But we're here. Together. Trying to do better. A quiet murmur of agreement rolled around the table. I'm grateful for that, I finished. And for all of you. And for him. I tilted my head toward the empty chair at the corner where Walter had always sat. Mom's lip trembled. Eric nodded once. Dad stood slowly, glass in hand. He glanced around, then took a breath. I want to say something. The room hushed. I wasn't a good father to you, Kara, he said, voice rough. I thought if I made you small, I'd feel big. If I ignored you, you'd stop reminding me of all the ways I'd failed. I convinced myself the house and the money proved I was worth something. He looked down, then back up at me. I was wrong, he said. About that. About hitting you. About trying to take what your grandfather left you. You didn't owe me those things. I owed you better than what you got. Silence pressed around us. I'm sorry, he said simply. His eyes shone. He didn't flinch away from the feeling this time. My throat burned. Thank you, I said. It was all I could give him in that moment. It was enough. He raised his glass. To Walter, he said, and to Kara, who's doing what he trusted her to do. The chorus of to Walter and to Kara felt surreal. If you'd told 19-year-old me in boot camp that one day my father would toast me in his own dining room, I would have laughed you out of the barracks. Later, after dishes and football and the comfortable sprawl of full bellies, I stepped out onto the balcony with my mug of coffee. The air was sharp, the sky a deep velvet blue, stars faint against the city glow. Down below, the lawn Walter had fussed over for decades sprawled quiet and dark. Behind me, inside the glass, I could see my family. Mom laughing at something Aunt Joan said. Eric and Dad arguing half-heartedly over a call in the game, the old house holding new patterns. I touched the edge of the doorframe, feeling the grain of the wood under my fingers. This was still the mansion they'd used as a measuring stick for their worth. But it was also becoming something else. A place where the woman who owned it didn't have to shrink to fit inside. I took a sip of coffee, letting the heat bloom behind my ribs. For the first time in a long time, the word home didn't taste bitter. And somewhere, I hoped, Walter was leaning on some celestial porch rail, watching his granddaughter stand where he'd always planned she would, and choosing in her own way to do what he'd trusted her to do. Spring rolled in on a cold wind and soft light. On base, my days slipped back into their old rhythm. Muster, briefs, logistics plans, 1,000 moving pieces that all had to land in the right place at the right time. Off base, the house finally started to look like it belonged to someone who cared what happened inside it. We fixed the roof Walter had worried about every winter. I hired a crew to repaint the peeling trim, choosing the same calm blue he'd loved. The final notice letters disappeared from the desk, replaced by a single folder labeled in my handwriting, Morgan House, in order. The penthouse key stayed on my ring, cool and solid, more symbol than destination. When I wasn't deployed or stuck on base, I still slept in my old room at the mansion. The familiar creak in the third stair, the way the morning light hit the hallway picture of Walter in uniform. One Saturday in late May, I stood in front of the mirror in that same hall, adjusting my khaki blouse before heading back to Norfolk. Dad hovered behind me, hands jammed into his pockets. So, he said, how long this time? 3 weeks, I said. Exercise, then probably back out. He nodded, staring at the floor. He cleared his throat. I got the rent together early, it's on the counter. I smiled faintly at our new language. Thanks, I said. He hesitated. You know, it still twists something in me, he admitted. Paying you to live in a house, I thought. He cut himself off, shook his head, but I did that. I took the loans. I put us here. He met my eyes in the mirror. And you're doing what your granddad trusted you to do, he said quietly. Protect the house, protect yourself, protect us even, from ourselves. I turned, leaned back against the railing. That's the job, I said. On base. Here, same principles. He huffed a small laugh. You always were the officer, he said. I just didn't want to see it. I picked up my go bag. Seeing it's a start, I said. At the bottom of the stairs, Mom pressed a Tupperware container into my hand. Lasagna, she said. Don't argue. I wasn't going to, I said, amused. She squeezed my arm. Text when you get there, she said. And Kara? Yeah. Her eyes softened. I like this version of you, she said. The one who doesn't disappear to keep the peace. I swallowed. Me too, I said. Eric clattered down the steps in his work boots, grease on his knuckles. Hey, he said. Boss said they might let me start doing inspections if I keep at it. That's good, I said. That's really good. He shifted, shoved his hands in his pockets. I put some money in Grandma's scholarship fund, he blurted, from my last paycheck. Not much, but figured. You shouldn't be the only one doing something with what they left us. A warmth spread under my ribs that had nothing to do with lasagna. That's solid, I said. She'd like that. He shrugged, awkward. Try not to get shot, he muttered. I'll put it on my calendar, I said. On the drive back to base, the city slid by in streaks of brick and glass. I passed the turnoff for the penthouse without even glancing at it. I knew I'd use it someday. Maybe rent it, maybe live there between tours, maybe turn it into something Walter would have approved of. But for now, it was enough to know it was mine because I'd been chosen to hold it, not because I'd grabbed it. Months later, when my ship returned from a short deployment, I came home to find a new plaque on the inside of the mansion's front door. A simple brass rectangle, screwed in straight. Morgan House in trust with Kara Morgan. She will know what to do. I ran my fingers over the engraved letters. Did you? I started. Dad stepped out from the dining room, wiping his hands on a dish towel. I asked the engraver to put that last part on, he said. Out of Walter's note. He shrugged. Seemed right, he said. And I wanted anyone who walked through that door to know whose judgment we're leaning on now. Our eyes met. Not because of the money, he added quickly. Because of your, spine. I laughed softly. Thanks, I said. I'll try not to screw it up. He shook his head. You'll make mistakes, he said. We all do. But I don't think you'll ever confuse your worth with what's in a ledger, or with how small you can make someone else feel. He swallowed. I wish I'd learned that when I was your age, he said. Would have saved us all a lot of pain. I thought of the will reading, the slap, the red bloom on my cheek, the way my hand had hovered over the trust binder before I'd picked it up like a shield. You're learning it now, I said. That counts for something. That summer, on a rare free weekend, I sat alone on the balcony with a stack of Walter's old letters. One in particular had always stuck with me. He'd written it back when I was a confused plebe, desperately trying to stay awake through navigation lectures. Kiddo, money comes and goes. Houses lean and crumble. The only thing that really carries on is how you handled what you were given. That's your real inheritance, not the numbers, the way you live with them. Love, Walter. I set the letter down and looked out over the yard. He'd left me penthouses and trusts and rental properties, yes. But what he'd really given me was permission. Permission to stop chasing the approval of people who only knew one story about me. Permission to say no when family tried to write checks on my life they hadn't earned. Permission to draw a line, not in anger, but in clarity, and stand there without shrinking. That, more than any deed or account balance, was what felt like legacy. I took a slow breath, closed my eyes, and let the quiet settle. Tomorrow, I'd be back in uniform, briefing junior officers on supply chain contingencies and deck load plans. Next month, I might be halfway around the world again, watching the ocean turn from blue to black under foreign stars. The mansion would stand whether I was here or not. The trust would hum quietly in the background. My parents and brother would keep fumbling their way through this new version of us, sometimes getting it right, sometimes not. But the story of who I was in this family, that had changed. Not because a judge said so, not because a check cleared, because I stopped letting other people's fear and favoritism decide my size. Walter hadn't just handed me assets. He'd handed me the right to live at my full height. And I planned to use it.